Topographies of Dissent presents the development of Armenian nonconformist art from the second half of the 20th century, tracing its evolution across 3 generations, from early modernists to the radical voices of the Soviet Union's final decades. This exhibition is divided into 5 sections: National Landscape, Land, Identity, Dream, Facets of Formalism, Abstraction, the third floor group, Pop Art, Hyperrealism, and Neo-Dada, and Dystopias of the Evil Empire. National Landscape, Land, Identity, Dream. Landscape has long been central to Armenian painting. Martyros Sarian, the father of modern Armenian art, blended vivid color and modernist form to express a pantheistic vision where land reflects the universe. His approach shaped the national aesthetic and deeply influenced the modernists of the 1960s and 1970s. In contrast to Sarian's vibrant palette, Armenia's natural landscape is stark and elemental. Rugged terrain, medieval churches, and the iconic silhouette of Mount Ararat across the border in present-day Turkey. In subsequent artists' hands, these images became powerful symbols of national identity and loss, epic in tone and spiritual in presence. Artists repatriating from the diaspora in the 1940s to 1960s, such as Armin Galents and Hagop Hagopian, introduced new emotional depths: quiet sorrow, longing, and displacement. Many came from former French and British colonies in the Middle East, bringing hybrid cultural influences that blended Middle Eastern traditions with European aesthetics. In the process, they reshaped Armenian art's relationship to memory, place, and belonging. Facets of Formalism. In the USSR, Formalism was a loaded term used to condemn any art that prioritized form, experimentation, or abstraction over the ideological clarity embodied by explicitly representational and government-approved style of socialist realism. Because formalism stood in direct opposition to the propagandistic framework of socialist realism, the Soviet regime weaponized the term to target nonconformist artists. Armenian artists historically distanced themselves from socialist realism's narrative and mimetic focus. Instead, styles like cubism, expressionism, and abstraction, rooted in classical modernism, became tools of resistance. These modernist styles resonated deeply with Armenian visual traditions, such as manuscript illumination, frescoes, sculpture, and carpet design. This connection allowed artists to mask modernist or formalist expression behind seemingly national art. Artists like Gevork Grigorian, Rudolf Khachatryan, Henry Elebekian, Aram Kupetsian, and Vladimir Makarian employed cubist compositions to harken back to Armenian ornaments and architecture structure. Meanwhile, Robert Elebekian, Ruben Adalian, and Van Sogomanian create expressionistic, spiritual, and philosophical meditations on faith and humanity. Abstraction. In the 1960s, abstraction became a dominant current in Armenian painting, influenced strongly by Arshal Gorky, an Armenian-born pioneer of American modern art and genocide survivor. Gorky's work was introduced to Soviet Armenia after the Armenian painter Ohans Sardarian encountered it at the 1956 Venice Biennale and shared it with local artists. Armenian abstract art developed a lyrical, expressive style, exemplified by 1960s artists like Seyran Katlamajian and Henry Elebekian. A postmodern second wave arose near the Soviet era's end, led by Vigen Tadavosian, who influenced younger artists. Avant-garde collectives like the Third Floor and the underground community Bunker embraced pure abstraction as freedom from ideology and tradition. Drawing from European art informelle and American abstract expressionism movements that prioritize the spontaneous gesture, artists like Grigor Mikhalian, Armen Rajhajian, and others embodied this vision of absolute artistic freedom. The Third Floor Group: Pop Art, Hyperrealism, and Neo-Dada. Founded in 1987, on the eve of the Soviet Union's collapse, the Third Floor movement became a prophetic force in Armenian contemporary art. Their work and the radical freedom with which it was made and exhibited in the late 1980s seemed to anticipate the fall of the Soviet Empire itself. The group's exhibitions in the early 1990s came to symbolize the beginning of a new era, an independent Armenia, and a cultural shift towards individual expression, experimentation, and alignment with global contemporary art practices. These young, independent artists embraced Western counterculture, including punk rock, breakdance, and underground media. Their work, ranging from performance and installation to ironic conceptual gestures, was controversial and often seen as threatening within the Soviet context, where such experimentation was politically charged. The artists Armen Grigorian, Karin Matsakian, and Edward Enfiagian drew on Neo-Dadaist montage, projecting ready-made images onto canvas. Grigorian and Matsakian focused on figurative work of bodies and objects, while Enfiagian created a symbolic meta-language, blending art history and contemporary reality. Dystopias of the Evil Empire. In the final years of the Cold War, Armenian artists began turning away from lyrical abstraction and decorative expressionism toward a new, emotionally charged figuration. Influenced by postmodernism, despite its limited recognition in the USSR, this shift embraced metaphor, photorealism, and direct engagement with political and psychological trauma. This transformation reflected a deepening cultural crisis. Still unhealed traumas from World War II were now intensified by nuclear anxiety, ecological fears, and the fading promise of the socialist utopia. As the ideological foundation of the Soviet Union began to erode, and the evil empire teetered towards collapse, artists searched for new ways to articulate fear, loss, and disillusionment. This section brings together works that confront cruelty, depersonalization, and the crushing force of authoritarian power, alongside visions of madness, alienation, and spiritual fragmentation. Though diverse in style, the artists here share a common urgency. Sergei Hovsepian, Hagop Hagopian, and Evrika Zatikian created works that function as visual acts of resistance, while Gayane Kachatrian, Suren Harutianian, and Rafi Adalian offered surreal, symbolic responses to a world slipping toward collapse. Armenia stood apart from the rest of the USSR for its unusually liberal cultural climate, earning the nickname USA, the United States of Armenia. Yerevan, the capital, was home to the USSR's first and only Museum of Modern Art, opened in 1972 and acting as a symbol of this unique openness. Within Soviet Armenia, the line between state-sanctioned realism and unofficial art was unusually blurred. Artists navigated this space through informal exhibitions, private studios, and underground circles. Nonconformist art was less about direct protest and more about exploring personal freedom, cultural memory, and new visual languages. This gave rise to a style later known as national modernism, blending Armenian tradition with global avant-garde tendencies. By the late 1980s, groups like the Third Floor Artists Collective pushed Armenian art into postmodern territory, breaking with past norms and embracing bold experimentation. This exhibition explores Armenia's topographies of dissent, spaces where aesthetics map inner freedom, cultural memory, and creative resistance.